Throughout history, certain figures emerge who shake the foundations of faith and challenge the very heavens themselves. Nimrod was such a man, an ambitious king whose defiance and pride led him to build the first great empire on earth. But why does the Bible cast him as a villain, warning generations against his legacy? Hidden behind the tale of the Tower of Babel lies a story so shocking, so controversial, that it reveals the very heart of humanity's struggle against God. If you've ever questioned the consequences of pride, ambition, or the pursuit of worldly power, this story is for you. Join us as we uncover the forgotten truths of Nimrod, the rebellious king who built an empire by challenging God himself. Before we continue, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. In the fertile plains of Shinar, amid the lush fields and winding rivers that nourished life after the catastrophic flood, Nimrod took his first breath. Born into a world rebuilding itself from devastation, Nimrod was a direct descendant of Cush, the son of Ham, grandson of Noah, the patriarch who had witnessed the destruction of humanity and its divine renewal. This lineage placed Nimrod firmly within the legacy of survivors charged by God himself to repopulate and steward the earth. Yet despite this honorable ancestry, the meaning of Nimrod's name, rebel, already cast a shadow over his future, hinting ominously at what was to come. Post-flood humanity was filled with both hope and fear. Communities were scattered and small, still haunted by the memories passed down from ancestors who survived God's judgment. Tales of the flood echoed from generation to generation, serving as a solemn reminder of divine authority and human vulnerability. People clung to survival, always mindful that disobedience brought swift consequence. But Nimrod, even in his youth, seemed strangely immune to these fears. From the beginning, he carried himself with remarkable confidence, displaying a defiance that intrigued some and unsettled others. Even as a child, Nimrod was different. Physically powerful and cunning beyond his years, he quickly distinguished himself through feats of bravery and skill. His parents watched with amazement and growing unease as Nimrod effortlessly outpaced peers during hunts, taking down animals far more dangerous than a boy his age should have faced. He mastered the bow and spear before most of his generation could even carry weapons. Elders murmured among themselves, recognizing signs of extraordinary talent, while some quietly wondered if his gifts were divinely blessed or dangerously cursed. As Nimrod grew older, his reputation expanded. He hunted not merely for survival, but for glory, relentlessly pursuing beasts that others fled from. Lions, bears, and fierce predators fell beneath his blade, and with each conquest, his legend grew. People began traveling from distant settlements to witness the great hunter, awed by stories that spoke of his bravery and strength. These visitors often remained drawn by Nimrod's magnetic personality, becoming loyal followers. Nimrod's growing charisma transformed him from merely respected hunter into a revered leader. But beneath Nimrod's outward heroism lurked a quiet defiance that concerned those who remembered the flood's lessons. Nimrod's elders often reminded him of humanity's place beneath God's sovereignty. "Remember," they urged, "we exist only by God's mercy, Nimrod. We must live humbly, obediently, or risk his judgment again." Nimrod listened, yet something within him rejected such humility. To him, submission to a divine authority was weakness. Secretly, he resented the fearful reverence around him, convinced humanity should control its own destiny. With each passing year, Nimrod's ambition swelled. No longer content merely hunting wild animals, he began challenging tribal leaders who he saw as weak, complacent, and overly cautious. With charisma and fierce logic, he argued humanity deserved more than to fearfully scrape out an existence. "Why bow to unseen gods?" Nimrod asked boldly, capturing hearts with speeches of strength, self-reliance, and earthly glory. "We must master this world ourselves, build a kingdom greater than anything the world has known." His vision resonated deeply with people weary of fear and constraint. Soon, Nimrod's followers numbered in the hundreds, then thousands. His influence spread across Shinar, eclipsing traditional leadership. Villages unified under his banner, drawn to Nimrod's promise of strength, prosperity, and freedom from the constraints imposed by tradition and fear of divine punishment. He became not merely their protector, but their king, a fearless ruler promising greatness. Yet even in his rise, some quietly questioned Nimrod's methods and his heart. Wise elders, those who remembered the flood's lesson, sensed danger in Nimrod's defiance. They saw clearly that he had no fear of divine judgment, no reverence for the Creator. To Nimrod, the heavens were a boundary meant to be conquered rather than a domain to respect. One day, as Nimrod returned victorious from a hunt, a respected elder approached him privately. "Nimrod," the elder said quietly, concern in his eyes, "your strength and ambition inspire us, but remember humility. The world before us fell through pride and rebellion. Do not forget God's judgment." Nimrod paused, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "Judgment," he scoffed softly. "Why should I fear judgment when I alone have achieved so much without divine favor? The gods stand silent while men suffer. We must forge our own path." The elder stepped back, deeply troubled. Nimrod's words were blasphemous, yet his followers cheered enthusiastically, oblivious or indifferent to the implications. Nimrod had spoken openly what many had secretly felt. Why submit to the divine when humanity could rule itself? His rebellion had now moved beyond quiet pride into open defiance. With each victory, each new follower gained. Nimrod's pride deepened. Villages turned into cities, and his growing empire expanded across Shinar. He became a legendary figure, whose very name evoked awe and fear. Yet Nimrod was never satisfied, driven by a relentless hunger, not simply for greatness, but to challenge the heavens themselves. Behind the adoration, Nimrod was aware of whispers among the elders who quietly opposed him. "They fear me," he mused coldly, "because they fear power itself." Dismissing their warnings, he continued boldly toward his destiny, a path that would soon lead him toward a confrontation far beyond earthly foes. Thus, Nimrod's story began, not as one marked by humility or obedience, but shaped entirely by ambition, pride, and rebellion. From his lineage as Noah's descendant to his rise as Shinar's revered king, every step forward drew him further from God's purpose, setting the stage for a clash that would echo through history itself. The world had survived the flood, but now faced a different threat. A single man whose defiance and ambition threatened to repeat humanity's darkest mistakes. Nimrod, the mighty hunter, now stood ready to build an empire, not for God's glory, but his own. His rebellion had begun. As Nimrod's legend grew, the young hunter quickly transformed into something far greater, a ruler whose ambition outpaced even his prowess as a warrior. Across the lush plains of Shinar, word spread rapidly of Nimrod's strength, his victories over fearsome beasts, and his extraordinary courage. Those who heard these stories traveled from faraway villages to witness firsthand the man whose very name had become synonymous with power and defiance. Yet Nimrod's true gift lay not just in physical strength, but in his keen ability to read the hearts of those around him. He understood humanity's deepest insecurities and desires, the longing for security, significance, and power. Nimrod knew exactly how to exploit these universal cravings, harnessing them to unite the scattered tribes beneath a single, powerful, vision his own. Babel was the first of Nimrod's great cities, a testament to human ingenuity and pride. Under his guidance, it swiftly grew from a modest settlement into a thriving metropolis of towering walls, bustling marketplaces, and imposing structures. Streets teemed with artisans, builders, merchants, and farmers, all united by their belief in Nimrod's promise of earthly greatness. To those who had once lived in fear of the wilderness or divine judgment, Babel seemed the ultimate refuge, a place of strength, unity, and human accomplishment. But Nimrod wasn't satisfied with one city. Driven by insatiable ambition, he continued to expand his dominion. Soon, Erech rose majestically, its vast stone monuments rivaling those of Babel. Akkad followed swiftly, becoming the heart of his emerging empire, filled with skilled craftsmen, warriors, and scholars who openly celebrated human achievement above divine provision. Calneh, too, sprang to life beneath Nimrod's relentless command, its fertile fields feeding his ever-growing populace. Every city Nimrod established was a bold statement, a clear challenge to God's command for humanity to multiply, spread, and steward the entire earth. Instead, Nimrod deliberately gathered people together, concentrating power and wealth into urban centers that stood as monuments to human pride. Through persuasive speeches, charismatic leadership, and careful manipulation, Nimrod convinced his followers that true greatness lay not in obedience or humility, but in defiance of limitations, even those set by the divine. "Why scatter yourselves across the earth, vulnerable and weak?" Nimrod proclaimed passionately to crowds enthralled by his confidence. "Together, we can build an empire so powerful, even the heavens will tremble. Together, we can be gods among men." His words resonated deeply with his people, tapping directly into their fears and insecurities. They saw Nimrod not merely as a protector, but as their champion against uncertainty and divine judgment. Under his influence, devotion shifted rapidly away from worship of the Creator toward worship of Nimrod himself. Statues were raised in his likeness. Songs of praise echoed daily in streets filled with adoration for their powerful king. Yet Nimrod's rebellion extended far beyond mere arrogance. Increasingly, his speeches openly challenged the very authority of God. Nimrod presented himself as the ultimate power, declaring boldly that no divine force could match the strength of unified humanity under his command. Priests loyal to Nimrod preached doctrines of self-glorification, declaring him to be the true god of their earthly empire. Sacrifices once reserved for divine worship became offerings to Nimrod's ever-growing ego. Within the glittering cities of Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, Nimrod cultivated a culture defined by power, luxury, and human ambition. Material wealth and status became the primary measures of worth. Obedience to God's commands was ridiculed as weakness. Humility was dismissed as cowardice. Only those who embodied Nimrod's ideals of ruthless ambition and pride thrived, while those who remained faithful to the Creator faced mockery, exclusion, or exile. Even within his palace, Nimrod surrounded himself with lavish comforts, attendants who catered to his every desire, and advisors who flattered his ego without question. The once simple hunter now lived amidst unimaginable luxury, gold-adorned halls, tables overflowing with extravagant feasts, entertainment provided by talented performers who sang praises to his name. Yet beneath the glamour lay tension, a quiet fear among those who remembered God's judgment from generations past. Some dared to speak privately about Nimrod's dangerous pride, fearing the consequences of openly opposing his rule. They whispered urgently among themselves, recalling stories from their ancestors of how humanity's defiance had led directly to the flood's catastrophic judgment. But their warnings went largely unheard, drowned out by the louder voices praising Nimrod's unstoppable success. Nimrod himself dismissed these fears. Secure in his earthly empire, he saw no need to fear judgment from a god he had openly defied, without consequence. As his confidence grew, so too did his boldness, his proclamations growing increasingly brazen. "Who needs the favor of heaven when we can claim greatness for ourselves here on earth?" he declared defiantly, his voice echoing through city streets crowded with cheering supporters. Yet, beneath this facade of unbreakable unity, cracks were forming. The more Nimrod defied divine authority, the clearer the divide became between his empire's values and God's original command. While Nimrod gathered humanity into vast urban centers to glorify himself, God's purpose, humanity's stewardship of the whole earth, was ignored. The lush lands outside Nimrod's cities lay abandoned and forgotten, replaced by crowded streets where pride and ambition thrived, but genuine spiritual connection faded. Quiet voices of resistance persisted, often among elders who remembered the stories of Noah and the flood. Their voices grew more urgent, warning Nimrod's followers of the inevitable consequences of rebellion. Yet Nimrod's charisma and relentless vision held firm control. Those who questioned his path were quickly silenced, forced either into compliance or exile. As Nimrod's empire expanded and his power solidified, the stage was set for an inevitable confrontation. The division between divine command and human ambition deepened dangerously. Humanity was united, but united not in obedience, humility, or stewardship. Instead, Nimrod's people found themselves bound together by pride, fear, and the dangerous illusion of earthly immortality. In Babel's heart, Nimrod gazed upward toward the heavens, envisioning his ultimate legacy, a monument so great it would transcend earth itself. He dreamed of challenging even God's sovereignty, convinced he could reach beyond human limits and claim eternal glory. His vision, fueled by pride and defiance, was about to drive humanity toward a momentous, catastrophic encounter with the divine. Thus, Nimrod's rebellion reached its peak. From famed hunter to mighty king, he had gathered humanity beneath his banner, offering a false promise of greatness and security built entirely upon pride and defiance. But unbeknownst to Nimrod, his audacious dream of conquering the heavens would soon become the very catalyst for divine intervention, forever changing humanity's destiny. Under the hot sun of Shinar, the city of Babel bustled with unprecedented energy and activity. Streets filled daily with workers carrying heavy stones, architects directing grand designs, and craftsmen meticulously fashioning bricks from clay, mud, and bitumen. The air was thick with anticipation, excitement, and a sense of collective purpose. All eyes were set upon the massive undertaking at the city's center, a structure destined to immortalize the glory and ambition of Nimrod's empire, the Tower of Babel. Nimrod had conceived the idea during one of his countless nights, gazing upward toward the infinite stars. Those nights, filled with a mixture of awe and defiance, birthed a dream of building a monument so grand it would not only touch heaven, but surpass it, a testament to human greatness and independence from divine authority. Nimrod envisioned a tower that would establish humanity's dominance, removing once and for all the shadow of fear that hung over mankind from the flood. Detailed preparations consumed Babel's inhabitants. Nimrod spared no expense or resource, bringing the finest architects, engineers, and master builders from across his expanding kingdom. At his direction, precise plans were drawn, ensuring every stone and brick fit perfectly to support a structure that would pierce the clouds themselves. Foundations were laid deeply and meticulously, as if anchoring humanity's pride and ambition firmly within the earth. Each passing day, the tower climbed higher, visible from miles away as an extraordinary marvel of human achievement. Laborers, encouraged by Nimrod's stirring speeches and promises of eternal glory, worked tirelessly. Nimrod himself visited the construction site daily, speaking directly to workers whose spirits were buoyed by their king's unwavering confidence. "Today, you build more than a mere tower," Nimrod proclaimed, his powerful voice echoing across the construction site. "You build our legacy, a monument to our strength, unity, and defiance. Together, we will conquer heaven itself." The workers erupted in cheers, energized by his boldness, their fears of divine judgment replaced by swelling pride. Under Nimrod's powerful influence, humanity's collective purpose had shifted dramatically, from obedience to God's command toward an ambition to exceed divine limits entirely. It was no longer enough merely to survive or even prosper. Nimrod had instilled in the people an insatiable hunger to prove themselves equal or even superior to their creator. But not all hearts shared this growing arrogance. Deep within Babel's bustling streets, scattered voices whispered warnings. Elders and prophets, faithful men and women who recalled the ancient teachings of Noah, pleaded quietly for reason and humility. Yet their voices were drowned out by the ever louder chorus of those enchanted by Nimrod's vision. As the tower ascended, so too did the people's collective pride. Its massive base stretched across the city center, colossal stone blocks stacked with precision and purpose. Its spiral stairs and ramps encircled upward, each higher level adorned with intricate carvings and detailed inscriptions exalting Nimrod's greatness and humanity's triumph over natural boundaries. On cloudless days, sunlight reflected brilliantly from its polished walls, radiating outward like a beacon of human defiance, visible for leagues. At the tower's summit, Nimrod planned a grand temple, not to honor the divine, but to celebrate humanity's independence. There, priests dedicated to Nimrod himself would preside over elaborate ceremonies, venerating mankind's supposed divinity and power. It would become the ultimate symbol of humanity's rejection of divine sovereignty, boldly declaring human self-sufficiency to the heavens. Privately, Nimrod's spiritual motivations were far more profound than mere ambition or pride. Deep within, he carried a bitter resentment toward a god he considered unjust and oppressive. To Nimrod, the flood represented not mercy, but cruelty, a threat hanging eternally over humanity, restraining them from true freedom. Building the tower wasn't simply an act of pride. It was an open rebellion, an assertion of humanity's right to rule itself without divine interference. His speeches increasingly reflected this rebellious spirit openly. Why serve gods who would destroy us without mercy? Nimrod proclaimed angrily before thousands. We are masters of our destiny. Our power is limitless, our strength unmatched. We will rise to the heavens, claiming our rightful place as rulers, beholden to no one, not even the divine. Such bold declarations ignited passion among his followers, inspiring unprecedented devotion. Nimrod had successfully turned human insecurity and fear into defiant pride, convincing thousands to willingly challenge divine authority. Humanity had united again, but tragically not to serve God or fulfill their divine purpose, but instead in rebellion against the very Creator who sustained them. Yet beneath the excitement and prideful celebrations that surrounded the tower's construction, tension grew quietly. Deeply troubled by Nimrod's brazen rebellion, faithful believers prayed fervently for divine guidance. Some began leaving Babel altogether, refusing to participate in this reckless defiance, warning others of impending divine judgment. But Nimrod, confident in humanity's unity and strength, dismissed these dissenters. In his mind, he was unstoppable, his empire invincible, his ambition justified by sheer human determination. The tower had become more than mere construction. It was now Nimrod's personal symbol of defiance, his declaration of war against divine sovereignty itself. Finally, as the tower's completion neared, Nimrod stood atop the unfinished pinnacle, looking triumphantly down at his magnificent city below, feeling invincible. Above him stretched endless sky, seemingly within reach. He laughed boldly, shouting to the heavens, "Do you see this, God? Your threat means nothing to us now. We have risen from destruction, stronger than before. We defy your limitations, your authority, your dominion. Mankind no longer bows to you. We bow to none but ourselves." His voice echoed fiercely, carried by winds across the plains of Shinar, as if daring the heavens themselves to respond. The crowd below roared in approval, their voices merging into one unified chant, celebrating Nimrod's rebellion. Yet unknown to Nimrod, his arrogance had already sealed his fate. His pride had blinded him, his defiance deafened him to truth. He had not merely defied God's command, he openly declared war against divine rule. This act of rebellion, so profoundly arrogant, was about to trigger an intervention of catastrophic proportion. As Nimrod stood boldly upon his tower, reveling in human greatness, the heavens above him quietly stirred. God's patience, stretched beyond measure by humanity's relentless pride, had reached its limit. Nimrod's rebellion would soon provoke a divine response, one that would shake humanity's foundations and scatter the people across the earth, forever altering the course of history. The tower stood proud, but Nimrod's dream teetered dangerously on the edge of divine judgment. The next moments would determine humanity's destiny, revealing the ultimate cost of defiance against God. High atop the towering pinnacle of Babel, Nimrod stood triumphantly beneath the boundless sky, his chest swelling with pride. Beneath him stretched his empire, a testament to human strength, ambition, and unity. Thousands gathered below, their voices lifted as one, chanting his name with fervent devotion. To Nimrod, this moment represented the pinnacle of human achievement, proof that his rebellion had succeeded, that even the heavens could no longer restrain him. But as Nimrod raised his fist toward the clouds in defiant celebration, the heavens stirred silently above. Unseen by those below, divine judgment swiftly descended upon the city. Without warning, a sudden wave rippled invisibly through Babel's crowded streets, spreading rapidly through the thousands who had gathered beneath Nimrod's tower. At first, nothing seemed amiss. Then, as Nimrod shouted a final command to his workers below, confusion erupted. A chief architect turned to the foreman beside him, speaking urgently, but the foreman simply stared blankly, shaking his head in confusion. Nearby, a group of laborers shouted panicked questions, but each found themselves unable to understand their neighbor's speech. The once unified chants quickly devolved into chaos, fear spreading like fire through dry grass. Nimrod stared downward, baffled and furious. "What is happening?" he demanded angrily, his voice echoing into the chaos below. But those who heard him responded only with confusion and panic. The precise communication that had allowed the tower's impressive construction now lay shattered, replaced by a bewildering array of languages no one had ever heard before. Within moments, Babel descended into madness. Crowds fractured into smaller groups, each unable to comprehend the others. Families searched desperately for one another, panic mounting with every unintelligible word shouted. Those who had moments before stood side by side, unified under Nimrod's banner, now faced each other as strangers, suspicious, fearful, and isolated. At the tower's summit, Nimrod watched helplessly, his fists clenched in rage. "This cannot be!" He shouted toward the sky, his voice raw with defiance and disbelief. "I have conquered the earth. I defy you still." But his words vanished futilely into the clouds, unheard, unanswered. Nimrod, who moments before felt invincible, now found himself powerless. His strength, charisma, and leadership had all depended upon humanity's unity, and with a single divine act, that unity had dissolved into chaos. As hours passed, the confusion deepened into despair. Nimrod descended hurriedly from his tower, desperate to regain control. But even his most loyal generals stared blankly, their words incomprehensible to him. Nimrod shouted commands frantically, grabbing his advisors by their shoulders, attempting to force understanding, but it was useless. God had shattered their common tongue, and with it Nimrod's empire itself fractured. The people, no longer united by language or purpose, began rapidly dispersing. Small groups formed, each speaking their own new dialects, fleeing Babel in confusion, fear, and mistrust. What was once a bustling metropolis swiftly turned into a chaotic exodus, streets crowded with refugees carrying whatever belongings they could hastily gather, leaving behind unfinished homes, abandoned marketplaces, and half-built temples. In his palace, Nimrod paced furiously, unable to comprehend the magnitude of his defeat. Rage consumed him as he witnessed his empire crumble, his grand ambitions falling apart stone by stone. The mighty hunter king, whose pride had soared above the heavens, now felt the bitter sting of humiliation. He slammed his fist against a marble pillar, roaring with anger and frustration, cursing the god who had dared thwart him. "I built this city," he thundered bitterly, his voice echoing through empty halls. "I united these people. I created greatness. You cannot defeat me." But even as he raged, Nimrod felt the truth gnawing at him. He had lost. All his prideful speeches, all his defiance, now mocked him. For all his earthly power, he had been effortlessly humbled by a divine power he could neither challenge nor comprehend. Determined to salvage what remained, Nimrod desperately rallied a small group who still understood him, urging them passionately to remain and rebuild. But his words lacked their former power. Fear had replaced loyalty. Doubt overtook devotion. Those who remained with Nimrod did so not out of admiration, but from fear of wandering alone in a strange new world. Meanwhile, across Shinar, Nimrod's once unified empire fractured into countless, smaller tribes. Each scattered group carried away only faint memories of the tower, the king who had united them, and their collective rebellion against divine authority. Confusion and mistrust birthed rivalry, conflict, and isolation, precisely the opposite of what Nimrod's empire had promised. Weeks passed, and Nimrod's efforts to rebuild proved futile. His few remaining followers, filled with bitterness, blamed one another for their downfall. The king himself, once fearless and powerful, sank into an embittered silence, consumed by resentment toward a god who had decisively defeated him. Nimrod's once thriving cities, Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, became ghostly remnants of their former selves. Tower foundations stood unfinished, marketplaces deserted, palaces empty and decaying. What was intended to be Nimrod's eternal legacy had become a haunting symbol of the futility of human pride and rebellion. Ironically, the legacy Nimrod left was not unity or greatness, but division. His grand attempt to gather humanity into one empire ended with humanity scattered into countless tribes, languages, and cultures, perpetually divided by barriers of mistrust and misunderstanding. In the end, Nimrod stood alone atop Babel's abandoned ruins, gazing bitterly at his collapsed dream. His rebellion had proven costly, his pride deadly. The tower meant to touch heaven had instead become humanity's lasting reminder of God's sovereignty and the futility of defying divine command. Quietly from his isolated throne, Nimrod whispered bitter words of defiance one last time. But this time, no cheering crowds heard him, no armies obeyed him, no empire glorified him. Nimrod's rebellion was over, ended not by conquest or battle, but by divine intervention too powerful to resist. In the silence of ruined Babel, the mighty king who had dared challenge the heavens sat defeated. Above him stretched endless skies, untouched and unchanged. Nimrod's tower had fallen, but God's authority stood eternal, unchallenged, unmoved, supreme. Thus ended Nimrod's dream, not with glory or conquest, but confusion and collapse. His legacy, intended to be unity, instead became division, a lasting lesson of humility, forever inscribed in humanity's scattered languages and fractured tribes. In the barren ruins of Babel, the echoes of Nimrod's rebellion lingered, carried forward in whispers and warnings through generations. Though Nimrod himself eventually faded from history, his legacy of defiance, pride, and self-glorification persisted, embedding itself deeply into the very fabric of humanity. From Babel onward, humanity never forgot the ambitious king whose arrogance had shattered unity and brought divine judgment. Parents recounted his story to their children as a cautionary tale, a stern reminder of what became of those who dared place themselves above God. Yet even as they warned, humanity continued repeating Nimrod's fatal errors, time and again choosing earthly power over divine obedience, ambition over humility, pride over surrender. Indeed, Nimrod's spirit of rebellion did not vanish with his empire. Instead, it scattered like seeds upon the wind, taking root throughout human history. Countless rulers and empires followed his path, driven by an insatiable hunger for greatness, power, and earthly glory, often disregarding the sovereignty of God. Pharaohs and Caesars, emperors and tyrants alike, each pursued Nimrod's path, convinced their kingdoms would endure where his had fallen. Egypt's Pharaoh, stubbornly defying the God of Israel, watched his prideful kingdom crumble beneath waves of divine judgment. Babylon's Nebuchadnezzar, arrogant in his splendor, was humbled by madness until acknowledging God's sovereign authority. Rome's Caesars, boasting of eternal dominion, saw their seemingly unbreakable empire fracture beneath prideful ambition. Each empire, every ruler who proudly declared earthly glory superior to divine purpose, unwittingly echoed Nimrod's ancient defiance. Yet Nimrod's legacy transcended kings and empires. It influenced entire societies, shaping humanity's values and ambitions toward endless pursuit of status, wealth, and power. His story became the archetype of rebellion against divine authority, warning clearly of the dangers of self-glorification. Scripture itself preserved Nimrod's memory, not as a hero, but as an enduring cautionary figure, a reminder that pride always precedes destruction. The Bible's portrayal of Nimrod was blunt, brief, but powerful. He was remembered not merely for his accomplishments, but for his rebellion against God's explicit command to humanity. Nimrod symbolized humanity's deepest struggle, the temptation to build a life independent from divine sovereignty, believing human strength alone sufficient for fulfillment. This struggle, Nimrod's ancient rebellion, remains tragically familiar today. In our modern world, we witness it repeated endlessly. Individuals chase fame, status, and wealth, prioritizing earthly ambitions above spiritual obedience. Societies glorify self-sufficiency, celebrating human power and progress while ignoring dependence on God's providence. Nations build economic and military empires convinced of their invulnerability, only to discover, often painfully, that pride still leads inevitably toward collapse. Even within communities of faith, Nimrod's legacy subtly persists. Churches and ministries may fall prey to pride, measuring success by earthly standards. Attendance numbers, material prosperity, public acclaim, instead of humble obedience to God's mission. Spiritual leaders face constant temptation towards self-glorification, forgetting their purpose is serving God's kingdom, not building their own. Yet amid this relentless echoing of Nimrod's rebellion throughout history, Scripture presents a radically different path, a path defined not by pride or earthly ambition, but humility and surrender to God. This alternative path stands in powerful contrast, illuminating humanity's true purpose in God's design. Consider Abraham, called by God out of the very land of Nimrod's rebellion, who humbly trusted God's promise and became the father of nations. Reflect upon Moses, once Prince of Egypt, who forsook earthly power to humbly follow God's command, liberating his people from oppression. Remember King David, who despite his immense achievements repeatedly humbled himself before God, acknowledging divine sovereignty over earthly greatness. Most profoundly, consider Jesus Christ himself, God incarnate, who embodied perfect humility, willingly sacrificing himself in obedience, offering humanity redemption from pride's destructive cycle. These figures, marked by humility rather than rebellion, reveal the truth Nimrod's pride obscured. True greatness comes not from human achievement, wealth or power, but from submission to God's sovereign purpose. Scripture repeatedly affirms this timeless truth, warning clearly, God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. James 4:6. Nimrod's tragic legacy stands as eternal proof of pride's destructive power. His empire, built upon rebellion and self-glorification, ultimately crumbled beneath divine judgment, scattering humanity into division and conflict. Yet God, in his mercy, continually calls humanity away from rebellion, inviting instead a path of humility and divine obedience. Today, Nimrod's story confronts each of us, urging deep reflection. It forces the question, whose legacy do we choose to follow? Will we echo Nimrod, chasing ambition, pride, and worldly success, inevitably bound toward frustration and collapse? Or will we embrace humility, surrendering our lives to God's sovereign authority, discovering true purpose, lasting fulfillment, and eternal significance? The choice is ours, but it demands honesty and courage. Nimrod's path, tempting though it appears, leads only to emptiness, isolation, and ultimate defeat. Humility's path, though difficult, promises true greatness, a greatness defined by divine approval rather than earthly acclaim, lasting beyond human lifetimes into eternity. Right now, the echoes of Nimrod's rebellion still resonate powerfully around us, tempting us toward prideful self-glorification. But we are not bound to repeat his legacy. Scripture's warning calls us urgently toward humility, obedience, and true surrender. Today, let Nimrod's story serve as our guide, a powerful warning against pride and rebellion. Let us choose instead the humility modeled perfectly by Christ himself, obedience over ambition, service above status, divine purpose before worldly acclaim. In doing so, we redeem Nimrod's tragic legacy, transforming rebellion's bitter lessons into pathways toward divine blessing and genuine fulfillment. God patiently invites us toward humility, urging us to abandon earthly empires for his eternal kingdom. It is a choice with eternal consequences, one Nimrod tragically rejected, but we still have opportunity to embrace. Let this be our moment of decision. Reject pride's destructive path. Embrace humility's transformative promise. Choose Today, a legacy built not on rebellion, but upon surrender to God's perfect purpose. Because in the end, true greatness, lasting, meaningful, eternal greatness, is found not in defiance or ambition, but in humble obedience to the God who created us, loves us, and calls us home. If Nimrod's dramatic story of ambition, pride, and rebellion resonated with you, take a moment right now to subscribe to our channel. Click the bell notification to ensure you never miss the powerful biblical truths that can transform your life. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and let's journey together toward a deeper understanding of Scripture's timeless lessons. Remember, true greatness is found not in defiance, but in humble surrender to God's perfect plan.